All right. Well, we're back. The random table. Let me introduce your illustrious panel. You say it, Scutifer. November no nuttifer. Don't call him Scutifer or he'll kick your buttifer. Scutifer Mike.
Wow. Thank you, Dunder, for that amazing intro.
I got more. He's got more votes than Broward. He's never a coward. Don't say Ryan David, because it's Ryan Howard.
Please, for the love of God, do not say Ryan David when talking about me.
Yeesh.
I've never
I've
done that.
only just completed shampooing my mustache. I'm mean. I'm clean. I'm here to be seen. It's Dundermoose. Hey, Dundermoose, Dundermoose. Hey, Dundermoose. And last but not leastest, the hostess with the hostess with the mostest, HarmonyGinger. We're glad to be back.
Thank you, Dundermoose.
Harmony, what are we
Glad to
talking
have you
about
back.
tonight? For crying out loud.
Megadungeons. And it's totally not just because I'm on a kick, but I'm kind of on a kick.
Yes.
So
Megadungeons.
I can't shut up about Megadungeons on Twitter right now. Everyone, like, I think everyone knows I go through these like Twitter phases where I'll tweet about like the same thing 20 times over the course of 3 days and then never talk about it again. But like with this one, it's been over the course of like several months, which is good because I needed to move on from the nonsense that was the B-word drama. But Megadungeons. Which Megadungeons.
So I've heard multiple definitions of Megadungeons. I think that there are people who believe things like the Keep on the Borderlands is a Megadungeon, which I probably wouldn't. And then there are the very obvious answers like Arden Vool, which are, thousands of pages long. So I think to like have this discussion, we should define our terms. What do you guys think quantifies as a Megadungeon?
Good question.
I would personally define a Megadungeon as a dungeon that is large and vast enough to be, if it needed to be, the central focus of an entire campaign. Now, I wouldn't say that my favorite Megadungeons that I've ever really run them as the central focus of a campaign, but a dungeon so vast and expansive that you could run an entire campaign with that dungeon. I think that would be my definition. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add.
Do you think that there's like a number, like a room number attached to that?
What if it's not room numbers? What if it's level numbers?
Okay.
How many levels?
But then we are.
Have?
How many levels does what have?
A Megadungeon have.
Well, Baramace has one.
Oh, that's
true.
Point.
Right.
Yeah.
So for me, you need to have at least 50 rooms to like break away from like the traditional like dungeon. Anything smaller than that, I think 50 rooms is a pretty big space and it's going to take multiple sessions to clear it. But that I think is on the smaller side of a mega dungeon. Barrow Maze, I think, has about 375 rooms in one level. But Gary suggests, that you have 12 levels of the dungeon. I've currently made 4 using like the Gary challenge. I've done 4 and I'm around 120 rooms. So it's ever expanding. We'll see how it goes. But I think that anything smaller than 50 feels like just a big dungeon.
So for those of us, certainly not me, but those of us who are unfamiliar with the Gary challenge, would you care to explain that?
Yeah, so it's been a while since I've read through it, but essentially you go through this process through several weeks. First, you're like coming up with the idea and you pitch it to the players. He says that you want to like have a starting town, but the idea of the dungeon is you start by mapping it with a side view, which one of our most loyal followers on the show was harassing me about on X, which I did not do. I did not make the side view first because that it allows you to map ahead, like what is the plan going to be for each level as you descend lower and lower into those dangerous dragon levels. Instead, I did the Dungeon 23 challenge where every day you make one room of the dungeon, and for every month that's one level. But I only got through to the end of April before I gave up. But by the time I was done, I had this massive sprawling network of rooms and corridors. It was pretty awesome. So no, I don't have my 12th level mapped yet.
How big should a dungeon be to qualify for a mega dungeon? We haven't heard from Mr. Howard yet.
So to me, a mega dungeon, I don't necessarily like to put a number of rooms on it or even a number of levels. The way that I see a mega dungeon, what truly makes a mega dungeon is it has to be big enough to essentially have multiple subsections within it. So the way I see a mega dungeon is it's like a dungeon with multiple dungeons inside of it. That to me is what I prefer from a mega dungeon. And I can get into that later, or I can go ahead and elaborate on what makes me, think of mega dungeons in that regard. But that gets into some of my weird thoughts on mega dungeons, which, yeah.
You're saving them for later, huh?
Yeah.
All right.
The juice, huh?
I say it has to be at least 10 levels, and it has to have probably 29 to 100 rooms on a level.
That's large.
That is massive. You think that anything smaller than that doesn't quantify as a mega dungeon, Dunder?
I'd say that's the sweet spot.
Oh, okay.
But
that is
it does
massive.
call into question stuff like this. Anomalous subsurface environment, which I read in preparation for today. I don't know if this qualifies. It does in the sense that there are 101, I think, rooms on the first level. It's huge and sprawling, but there's only 3 levels and a setting for this bad boy. So it's an incomplete dungeon. Now it references other levels that haven't been published yet. So like, is this the beginning of a mega dungeon, or is this something that saw itself as a mega dungeon, attempted mega dungeonhood, but only achieved dungeonness?
Yeah. So how do they break out with like factions and like the levels? Like, is it themed, or like what? How is the conflict set up in that?
Whoa.
Because like that's a massive part of a mega dungeon is the faction play that's on each level and like the theme of the level.
Yeah.
So
if you're gonna get into this one, so it's the first half of the book is the setting. This is a fun read, by the way. I don't know how many mega dungeons are fun to read, but this one,
all of them.
It has a setting. It takes place in the city of 1,000 towers or something like that. And basically, there's all these little city states that are run by powerful wizards, and most of them are bad. Most of them you'll just die if you go there, or be enslaved immediately, or whatever. But there's one city state that like has a magnanimous ruler. And so that's where this takes place. And the mega dungeon it's gonzo sci-fi. So there's a lot of factions and there's a lot of stuff that's weird, but basically, without giving too many spoilers, the dungeon itself just self-created under this mountain. It is truly an anomaly. It wasn't like some mad wizard built it. It just showed up with elementals to run it and help it. And it's like deep in the past, our future, so really high science. This corporation, kind of like the back rooms, the liminal. I don't know if you guys know what the back rooms are on YouTube. Yep. This corporation just kind of found it, and they're like, "What is this thing?" And they were like making these crazy scientific discoveries because physics doesn't exactly apply in all the rooms, and they were making all these discoveries, and then something happened deep down and they had to seal it off, and there wasn't any time for the scientists or their families to get out, and so it's been sealed off for like 3,000 years, and society has fallen since then. And like now, if you find the right object that you can use to open, it's not even the mega dungeon, there's like another little tiny dungeon that you've got to find a way in, and if you do, huge beams of light shoot into the sky, like spotlights start flying, like these big, stinking Fallout style doors open up the mountain, like different levels going into the mega dungeon. And because the lights go on and everything's like loud, it's going to attract all kinds of adventurers and other monsters and everything to the dungeon, as it's just opening up for the first time. So the first time you get into it, you open it up for everybody. I feel like I've gone far.
It's sciencey. So it's really sciencey and gonzo, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's like the people that used to live and work there that like, what happened to them 3,000 years later? There's the weird stuff that was already always there. There's the stuff that's been mutated, and there's robots that have like, it was their job to keep it up, and some of them didn't. Some of them broke over time and had to graft on like bones and stuff to try and like. So there's like a hierarchy of like ones that are mostly all still robotic, and like the lowest members have like had to cobble themselves together out of whatever they could lay hands on. So it's really, there's a lot of factions. I don't know if I can explain the factions to you, but let's talk about factions then. What is the point of the factions in a Mega Dungeon?
Actually,
well, I think it depends. Oh yeah, go ahead, Ginger.
Okay, I was going to say, now that we've defined our terms, let's. There are a couple questions and comments about this in chat that I'd like to have us address real quick before we move on, if you don't mind. First, Driving and Dragon says he thinks that a mega dungeon is a structure that exists beyond the scale of what is rational. For instance, the small church with 100 miles of catacombs. I think that's a good point, because my favorite ones, or my favorite one, I think we know what my favorite one is. But it makes less and less sense the further you go down.
Yep.
And I always like that, how just the fabric of reality begins to dissolve as you get deeper into this thing. And Macho Mandoff asks, Dunder, do you think the pizza slice of doom in Trollopolis is a mega dungeon?
Well, first of all, I don't know how big it is. We have gone there multiple times, but I do think it qualifies. And maybe my earlier bunch of numbers was totally whimsical and just of my own. But here's, to me, is the difference between a dungeon and a mega dungeon. A dungeon is a problem that has to be solved. Kids are disappearing. There's an ogre lair deep in the woods, and however many rooms it is, the party goes there and they beat the big bads and they clear it out and they solve the problem. So a dungeon is an adventure, right? A mega dungeon is a solution. It's not a problem. It is something that is so big that nobody's going to solve it on an initial delve. You're not going to solve it on your 10th delve. The mega dungeon is there because in the overworld, you are not strong enough, you do not have enough henchmen, you do not have enough money or power, and there is a place that you can go to again and again and risk your life, risk your neck against what's down there to haul out an ungodly amount of easy money that you didn't have to work all year for, seeding your field and praying for rain and that kind of, like, you just got together a bunch of bloodthirsty reavers and you went down there and you got paid, son, and you leveled up, and now you got enough money that you can hire some folks to go knock over that stronghold in the next region or whatever. The mega dungeon is a big dangerous place that's like an ATM that solves your other problems in the world. What do you guys think of those definitions?
So I when you're saying this, it's making me think of there are two arguments that I've been hearing online recently about when do you stop going into the dungeon? When is the dungeon no longer useful to you? And then there's the idea that like the dungeon should never be irrelevant. And so like Greg Gillespie, he writes these mega dungeons. He's renowned for his mega dungeons.
Yep.
And his idea, his philosophy is that at every level of play, you need to be in the dungeon. And then there's like the more bro SR style, which is yeah, right. And then there's like the more bro SR style where it's like, you know, you can go into the dungeon. That's fine. You know, it's what level 1 through 3 you probably need to. And then from there, like, how do you spread to the overworld and like take over? And so, yeah, I think that for mega dungeons, if you're mapping them the way that Gary intended, which is like, you know, you're making 12 levels and, you know, there's like an elemental level and a dragon level, I don't think your 14th level fighter will ever see those things.
And Ryan, you were going to say something about that.
Yeah, so I somewhat famously argued with Greg Gillespie on that point on my show, because Greg has a very narrow viewpoint of what like essentially constitutes anything in D&D. I brought up the idea that a city could be a dungeon, and he seemed aghast at that notion. And I don't know. It's one of those things that he has said to me that I actually like disagree with. No, you don't have to continuously go back into the dungeon. Because at some point you should have people to do that for you.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I fall somewhere between the standard mega dungeon philosophy of like continuing to delve in, and that is the central focus of the campaign, and then the mega dungeon as a tool to get the stuff you need in the overworld to build your faction, your mage tower, whatever it is you're doing up there, and just using that as a way to fuel this stuff. And I do love overworld stuff, but I think my players know that I'm in love with running long dungeons. And I think it was Pounce Cleveland, says a real mega dungeon can't be completely cleared out. It's either that big or there are challenges or enemies that can't be defeated by mortals. And I think that's kind of the essence of what I see, because how many groups finish mega dungeons? I think the answer is like maybe 1%. Like I'm sure there are thousands and thousands of groups that have started Undermountain or Stonehell or Barrowmaze, and like how many finish? Maybe like 1% of those groups. Yeah. And maybe that's just my experience where the campaign isn't really planned to end, but I mean I just haven't seen those things finished, and maybe it's just a testament to my attention span. I don't know, but
in my group, so I started my OSC 1-to-1 time game based around Barrowmaze, like in the little town next to Barrowmaze. And the players absolutely loved the idea for the first couple of levels. And they would go, I think we cleared about 40 rooms in the actual mega dungeon, and then half of the tiny micro dungeons on top. And at a certain point, I took the factions and I handed them over to some of my buddies, and what essentially came from that was that there was no need to go into the dungeon because they were taking their factions out of the mega dungeon and attacking the town and burning villages. And at that point, there was no reason to go in because there was too much chaos, and the choices that the players were making were spreading out into different areas, and the mega dungeon was just too small for us anymore. And I as a dungeon master, I kind of side more along with Greg Gillespie. I think that the mega dungeon should be the core feature of the campaign. I think that you should be going down there all the time. I want to put artifacts at level, 5 and 6 for people to chase after. And my players just aren't interested in what I want to do. So they're going to do what they want to do. And I'm just going to play, I'll just, I'll solo play the mega dungeons on YouTube, and, I'll let the players do what they want to do during the campaign time.
Well, can I ask then, for people that want to kind of put the campaign around the mega dungeon, how does that not become railroading at some point? when you clearly as the DM have a desire because you've read ahead and you know all the cool stuff. Oh man, you know that if they just go to that next room, there's that awesome thing that I read about or that I created. But maybe they're like, man, the last 3 times we went down there, we got our butts kicked and hauled out bags of copper. Maybe they lose interest in it. So if you try to build a campaign around a mega dungeon, how do you not get that tug and pull that we've all felt with conventional style play where the players may be interested in stuff completely outside of the thing that you think is the most important part?
I think to make that work in a way that's not railroady, you almost have to present a scenario like a Raiders of the Lost Ark, where you've got multiple factions have discovered that there's something in this particular location, and so you have multiple interests that are pursuing this. So essentially, like all the players that matter are going to be concentrating on this particular area. Now, you can still players might say, okay, that king has moved a whole bunch of his forces over here and is trying to, muscle in on this territory. Why don't we go take his kingdom while he's not looking or something like that? That could happen too. But the central action of the campaign happening kind of around this particular site that everyone's trying to excavate and explore and pull stuff out of, I can see that working in a non-railroady style.
I think. Oh, go ahead.
No, please, Harmony. We haven't heard from you in a while.
Okay. All right. We're too polite. All right. I think that there are a couple ways to avoid railroadiness having a mega dungeon as the central structure in your game. And I say this as someone who uses them, but not as the central structure. I have them kind of an optional thing if players want to delve in. But I think there are a couple ways to do it. First of all, a lot of mega dungeons are not linear in any way, even though, they go down, but different groups will still have different experiences because they branch off and go all sorts of places. But a couple things you can do, I think, are one, let them take what they find and do what they want to with it. Because a lot of times they'll try and fortify an entire floor and become like the masters of that floor and not go any deeper and just kind of stay at that floor. I've experienced this. I don't know if everyone has, but this is something that my players have done. And they ended up, the campaign was then like them defending their floor. And it was a very odd way to approach it, I think. But another thing you can do is have multiple groups exploring the same area, because then it doesn't just become like the DM is railroading us to go down here. It becomes, we want to get the good loot before the other group.
Yeah.
And
let those multiple factions, those parties, affect the dungeon against the other party. So one thing that one of my guys did is he bricked up the entrance that that one of the parties was using to access a point that they were trying to protect. And I was like, that's brilliant. Like one of the parties was coming through and they were like, wait a second, where does this wall come from? Like our map, we've been through this area before. Like our map did not have this here before. And I think you do need one-to-one time. You need a very strict timekeeping with multiple parties. But if you're going to be using a mega dungeon, one-to-one time is just absolutely perfect.
It changes the whole game with a mega dungeon. It really does. Okay, but before we get into timekeeping, oh man, the comments are going by so quickly, guys. I have trouble with all of them.
I saw one that was really good.
This one's good. Bradford Walker. I think he's coming from Dundermoose stream. Maybe Ryan's
Explore one.
Ooh, I don't know which one that one is.
Yeah, maybe after Bradford.
Yeah, I see it. Brad, he says, if you want the mega dungeon to be the focus of the campaign, then it has to be where the unavoidable active opposition has to stem from. I think that's completely correct. And which one of Random Explorers?
Oh yeah, he put out a couple that are just bangers.
They're all bangers.
Mega dungeon should be a bunch of unexpected entrances, paths, and exits that can make a mega dungeon more connected to the overland. Yes. So on the mega dungeon that I'm making, I've had the players kind of testing it and they're dipping their toes in, and there's a few different entrances, and I'm highlighting in different colors like the areas that they're exploring, and then I'm trying to remember to like go back through. And what's great about, okay, we can't talk about time yet, but maybe I should hold this then. Yeah, let's wait for that, because I have like a great point that I'd like to make about time using this. I think time is so important when it comes to Mega Dungeons, so a lot of what I have to say stems from that.
Is that what you're waiting to talk about, Ryan, too, or did you have another little nugget?
No, I mean, the time conversation is always interesting. That I've said what I have to say on this particular topic, though.
Like a Jeffro campaign, we're just spawning loose threads, and we're gonna need a Bronstein to tie them all back together.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Great. So I want to talk about not just timekeeping, but timekeeping and resource management. I think that the biggest thing that can ruin a mega dungeon is allowing the players to restore their resources. If you're playing 5e long rest, if you're playing like AD&D, then let them spend a week resting in a room or whatever, and letting them level up, and just not tracking resources and letting them go down with multiple stops. I think that is the most common way to ruin a mega dungeon.
Absolutely.
Because I think that the mega dungeon shines when you have multiple delves in and you have to return to the surface.
You have to be,
because that's when you go use the restock tables. Yep. All right. I don't want to take this one. Go on.
So, do you guys know John McGowan? He wrote a book called The Living Campaign. Okay, and one of the things that he talks about, I've read his book a few times now. I love it. One of the things he talks about in that book is how one-to-one time slows down the campaign. And while time is ever moving and it can kind of feel like, oh man, I need to keep up, it's a treadmill. When you're looking at it from day to day and you're making your choices as the dungeon master, you're allowed time to think about what would happen or what did happen since the players did this thing down in the dungeon. And when the players have chosen like their favorite enemy, they're going to mess with that guy, right? And how can you make that guy react if you are pausing time at the end of your session and, like the party, they close the door, they're like, okay, we'll see you guys next week, and then we'll open the door. With one-to-one time, you're allowing the dungeon to come alive and say, okay, they left at the end of session, went back to town to collect their treasure and to go level up. They have to spend a week training. When they come back, we're going to be ready for them. We're going to have traps set up. We're going to brick up all the entrances that they tried to come through. And when they come through and start smashing down the walls, we'll know this time. We'll have arcane sigils set up everywhere. Anytime they try to step into where they've been before, we're going to blow them up. Or even better, we'll send our agents out of the mega dungeon after their friends and family, chasing them down and getting retribution. And without one-to-one time, it is so hard to manage those things. That's the point I want to make. I love one-to-one time in Mega Dungeons.
Without some type of timekeeping, whether it's 1-to-1 or some other ratio, they never leave the dungeon, right? Like they get far enough and then they pause it. It's like, okay, we'll see you guys next week or in 2 weeks when we play again. And then everyone wants to pick up right back in there. And there's like that whole rhythm of going out, getting your stuff, pressing your luck. Do we have enough food to get back Mr. Frodo? All of that stuff doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter.
Right.
We'll just close the door and take a long rest in the dungeon and then keep going. And so when
you can only carry so many torches, right? You can only carry so much treasure. And the mega dungeon,
we've all got dark vision. We don't need torches. Right.
It's ever evolving.
When I was playing 5e before I had been enlightened, I did not get I didn't get the point of a mega dungeon. I was like, why would you want to just go crawl underground? Where's the story there? Especially if you're thinking in minds of, well, we've got to accomplish the story. If the big bad is 20 levels down, 100 rooms on each level, it's like we can't finish that story in a couple sessions, right? Like it didn't even make sense to me. I didn't even get Undermountain as a thing. I thought, well, that's old. It's archaic. It was like the 10-foot pole in the player's handbook. It was there, but it was vestigial to me. It didn't make sense.
Serve? Yeah.
It wasn't then until I started, the bros took me under their wing, started teaching me first edition and how encumbrance is not a boring rule that everyone rolls their eyes at, but it forces you to make decisions. What supplies am I bringing with me? How many empty sacks am I going to buy now in the hopes that I'm going to fill them when I'm there? All that kind of stuff. I feel like,
yeah.
Well, I don't want to go too far down, but like I feel like the style of play that you have adopted will vastly impact the amount of fun and joy you get out of the use of a mega dungeon. And for some styles of play, it doesn't even really make sense at all. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, in order to make this thing work, you have to have resource management and timekeeping, and you can't do all the hand wavy bullshit that 5th edition allows players to do. I know, Crafty's in chat right now. He'll say, actually, if you read the DMG, what's in the DMG for 5e is basically powerless to stop players from hand waving stuff because no one reads that book, unfortunately, and they should. But
Jenny Dye read it.
Yeah. To get back to the point that I was making, unless you've got these mechanics in place, this is a pure survival mode of playing where you've got to know, how much further can we go before we have to, get back out of there. Without that, you just can't do it. Or if you do it, it just feels pointless. It's like playing a video game at that point. We're going to pause here, we're going to save game, and then we'll come back later.
Right. If you can just cast Goodberry every day, then you can eat forever. You never need to leave the dungeon. If you cast Light infinitely, then you never need to leave the dungeon. I would like to try 5e 1-to-1 bro style someday.
I'm sure it would work well.
It would. You have to
some
homebrew
experience.
But yeah, Harmony's running one right now.
You don't necessarily have to homebrew it. Okay, so in the DMG, there is an optional rule for long rests that take a week. There is a rule for training time. Basically, a lot of the stuff that people say, this is why AD&D is the pinnacle. And I'm not saying it's not. I'm not shitting on AD&D. I quite liked both games I've played of AD&D. I thought they were great. But a lot of the things people say, this is what 5e doesn't do. It's actually in the DMG, and you can. It's there. People just don't read it.
The numbers for the DMG 5e training though are it's like 20 or 30 gold.
Yeah, you have to increase.
I would
that.
definitely increase that. I would change some things. I would remove the light spell. I would remove Goodberry. Just like little things that players I think take for granted.
Mike. Yeah. Yes. You don't need to remove the light spell. Nobody plays a human anyway. Everyone has dark vision. You just have to enforce that they have disadvantage on perception. Easy.
That's human. Default. We got default.
Humans only. Yes.
I'm the one who in 5e would always pick the human and either like a fighter or a paladin because I knew that no one else at the table would be playing either of those classes. So it's just like, oh wait, I get my first choice. Okay, sweet.
Well, can I ask? Without without gold for XP, without training to level up, with something like milestone for XP, why would anybody go into a mega dungeon in 5e? Like, what is the draw? Gold, as far as I can tell, like gold, silver, electrum, nobody. Okay, let me just say for myself, because I'm not saying that I played 5e correctly. But when I played, if you got gold or even rubies or something, it was just like, I was hoping it was. You're like the kid that opened socks on Christmas morning, right? Like you were hoping for something.
My magic
better.
Item.
Yeah. I wanted a Holy Avenger.
I think that there's
all I got was this goblet full of rubies.
I think that if I was playing a modern game, I would, I would just implement the bro philosophies, and I would use a mega dungeon. We would be tracking encumbrance. So at that point, like the 5e encumbrance is actually pretty vicious. Like, there's not a lot of room for treasure. If you're maximizing your armor and your shields and your weapons, like there's very little room for treasure in your bags. So you know, like if you want to actually level up, I would do gold as XP. Definitely nothing with milestones ever.
The thing
for
that
any
gold for
game.
XP does is it draws them in. It says,
Yeah.
this is why you want to come in here and haul the treasure out, because you will get stronger if you do it. And that's what people want.
Yeah.
That's why in the game that I'm working on right now, Project Skeleton, I've actually completely eliminated XP and made everything based around gold, because you've got to like go out, kill the monsters, collect the bounties, harvest whatever you can from them, go into the dungeons, but then you've got to go take that gold to someone who can actually do something for you to help you get to that next level. You got to go find your mentor, you've got to pay them, you've got to pay for your training expenses, all that. And so instead of saying like there's XP and there's gold and they're interchangeable, or you know they're not interchangeable, they're two separate things, I just eliminated the XP and said, you know, it's all based on gold now.
So if we could get back to time for just a second, because there's a few comments in the chat. Number one, Driving in Dragons points out that 1-to-1 time is not necessary for the enjoyment of a mega dungeon. And I'm not sure everything that I don't know if I can represent everything he said he means with that. So probably definitely flesh that out for us, Driving. But also Tim, I did have lunch with him last Thursday, and we were talking. I was like, I'm going to be on this show, and we're going to be talking Mega Dungeons, and he's got a lot of experience. And he was talking about playing the first time he and his friends played the Temple of Elemental Evil. And there was, I haven't played that one, but apparently there's a part where you get into these nodes, and you have got to get all the MacGuffins and put them in the right spots to get back out, or you're stuck there forever. And he said, when we got into that cycle, the DM was like, all right, write down for me everything you have, because you're not getting any more until you get out of here. And he was talking about the magic users, how like they were taking time to scrape the bat guano off the walls and stuff, because like they were running out of arrows, they were running out of components for their spells. Even if they still had the spell, they didn't have the thing they needed to cast it. He said it was very tense, that the resource management, but tying it into the 1-to-1 thing, there are things that can happen in a dungeon that run afoul of what I'm used to doing with the bros with 1-to-1, meaning hopefully you get back to town by the end of the session. Like when you know everyone's like, okay, it's midnight, it's about time to wrap this up, guys, let's get our loot and let's get out of here and get back to town. Well, in a mega dungeon, you can have traps that will drop you 2 or 3 levels, right? Where you're like, oh crap, now I'm on level 5. I haven't mapped any of this dungeon. How do I get out of here by 11:30? Right? So there are times where 1-to-1 and don't sleep in the dungeon. Yeah. It's like, what do we do? Are we all just stuck playing till 2 in the morning? Or is like, well, I've got to log off because I got work tomorrow. The DM's just going to solo play and tell me how I died. You know, right? Like, what are the awkwardnesses that 1-to-1 does in a mega dungeon?
No, absolutely. The idea that like, you know, rocks fall, this entire way is cut off. It would take, you know, maybe days to excavate ourselves out of here. Like that is an issue. I say the PCs die. I'm a mean, cruel dungeon master, but we started the campaign with the principle that kill your darlings. No one here is going to obsess over their character. I told them that your characters can die in downtime. We have assassins, and all they have to do is like succeed, and you're dead. And so don't cry about it.
Rebel? Did they quit, or were they down for it? And if so, how did you get them?
That's great. I've done two bro campaigns. The first one was 2 years surrounded by Barrow Maze. And as I understood the principles and I put them into practice over the period of 2 years, the campaign was shifting and changing, and we were learning what was working and what wasn't. And in that growth, there were pains, and people were leaving the campaign and other people were joining. Right now, we've recently just started our second campaign, and everybody is joining with the same idea about what to expect from the game. Some of the people that quit the first campaign have joined in on the second one because they were like, okay, I just wanted to know, you know, the lethality of what was going to happen going into the game. They were very attached to their old PCs, but now they're like, okay, we're just going to make guys, and we're just going to have fun with it and just let go of the things we can't control, because we want to have the verisimilitude of what it would really be like if there was warring factions in a hexed size area. I'm getting off the topic of Megadungeons, but I think that your character should be able to die. Right. So don't get too attached to your level 4 fighter. I know you loved him. I know it took a long time to get to level 4, but he could die with a rock's collapse. That's part of the issue with going down into any place that's dangerous. Prepare very well. Grappling hooks and rope. You need magic users, and you need to keep them safe so they can get you out of these sticky situations. A lot of people want to prepare sleep or, magic missile, but there are other spells that you can prepare that are going to help you in ways that you don't quite think about always. Like being able to carry a bunch of extra weight all of a sudden is a lot more useful, or blocking a door or opening a door is a lot more useful. There's a lot to that question.
To kind of sum up and answer Driving and Dragons' concern here, let's say you don't want to use one-to-one time because you've got issues with one-to-one time. You need to pick a timekeeping rule set or system, or whatever you want to call it. You need to have some way to keep a record of time and stick with it strictly. That's the only way to kind of make this work. If you aren't keeping track of time, then all you're doing is pause, save game, exit out, and then we'll come back right where we were last time. So if you don't like one-to-one time, find another time scale that works better for your particular schedule or group, or however you want to do it. But you've got to keep track of time in some way.
I see Crafty's comment. It says, ask Mike what happened to his last game. My elf still has the butter knife the dwarves worship as the axe of the dwarf lords. That is the campaign we're running right now, Crafty, but I got bad news. The players have sided with your enemies. So they're not interacting with you at all. They're acting against you. That's spoilers.
So to the question of what I would do in a situation where players find themselves trapped on a lower level and our game ends at 10:30 and it's 11 o'clock and people have work in the morning. The one-to-one purist might not like this answer, but sometimes if it's not going to break anything, and if I'm pretty confident that things are gonna be okay if I do this, sometimes I will let them pause there and then pick it back up next week. And then they get out, they get 2 weeks of downtime to catch up with a real-time clock. That's really how I handle it sometimes. Yeah, it's a little bit flex, but I mean, I like to keep it caught up with the real-time clock. But if there's no other group that could affect. Now, if there's another group that could affect, then things are a little bit different. But sometimes you can kind of flex with it a little bit. But also, if it's one player, if one player falls down a hole and ends up on level 5 while the rest of the group is on level 2, then we might do it a different way. First of all, ask the player, all right, what do you have? Do you have a way of getting out of this? Show me what you got. What's your plan here? This is the situation. And if the answer is they don't know, or they just don't have anything that's going to get them out of this mess, then yeah, they're probably dead. But I always remember, I make note of where they die, because I one time had a guy lose a character early in a mega dungeon, and of course that character comes back later as a mind slave to something else to mess with them. So you can do a lot. Like I just lost 2 level 5 characters on level 1 of Stonehell. I just had like how they managed that.
That's hilarious.
They came into level 1 of Stonehell. This group is level 4, 5, and 6. I think there were like a level 6 and level 5 that died. This group is like level 4 through 6. They're on a level 1 mega dungeon, and they came in, and there's this group of orcs that have like this whole part barricaded off, and they're walking in like, yeah, we can take the whole camp of orcs easy. This is for babies. So they start like goading and like yelling at the orcs, saying, calling them cowards. And so then they're facing orcs from the east, orcs from the north, orcs from the south. And instead of retreating like they maybe should have done, they stood in the junction, get surrounded, and learned a very valuable lesson.
How do you do XP for that game?
I mean, I do XP based on treasure they find, enemies they kill, and clearing levels. We get a little more XP, but it's not necessarily like 1-for-1 on the dungeon levels, because this is my Godstein game. So it's basically based on the overworld mostly. I put Stonehell in it because there was this crater and they said there has to be a mega dungeon here. And I'm like, I'm not writing a mega dungeon for you guys. So let's figure out what the best fit is. And Stonehell seemed about the best fit. So I put it there, and it's sort of an optional side venture,
Awesome.
but
Discord
claimed a couple.
Discord and or like direct messages can be really like if you had one guy that did like the elevator trap dropped him to level 5. Everyone else gets their loot and gets out, and then that can just be little messages between you and that one person, and that can be a really fun way to play too, like between sessions where he's got this whole adventure that he's on that nobody knows about. It doesn't take your full attention like running all 5 or 6 people that are playing would. And you can just pick it up and drop it. You know, you don't have to be playing during dinner, but you're probably thinking about it. You're like, oh man, as soon as dinner's over, I'm going to look at that and see where he is and how he's going. So that's one way.
Our Discord is blowing up all day long. So
yes. I mean, that way lies type 3 Bronsteins, right? Like if everybody's doing that, then sooner or later you will burn out. But I do want to make sure that because I don't know if Driving in Dragons perspective was adequately represented by us.
I mean, he's saying that like you can just stop time. You shouldn't be. Yeah, it's perfectly acceptable. I just disagree with that completely. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. I do remember also. Tim was reminding me, we had a long conversation. We were at Wings, etc. It was awesome. But Tim's reminding me that like with his buddy's mega dungeon that his buddy had created, there was a room of remembrance that had these like, it was like a gallery. And every time one of your characters died in the mega dungeon, their portrait would appear in there magically. So it was kind of a place you could go and you could see all the people.
Homage.
Yeah. And I feel like Stonehell's got something of that as well with their graffiti, right? Harmony?
Yeah.
I'm seeing in chat here, Michael Dale has what I think is a good question here. And this kind of gets back into the realm of like resource management and things. Should good mega dungeon designers incorporate possible safe spaces, i.e. defensible, friendly, or unpopulated areas, even if ultra rare?
Excellent.
I think that is a good way for players to use resources in a mega dungeon, because certainly there should be areas where, well, like someone has holed up in there already, because you kick in the door and there's monsters in there. So you have to imagine those monsters have been in there for a little bit and they have defended it. So like, yes, there are areas of the mega dungeon that are defensible, but it will be up to the players to use their resources to essentially, you know, you want to install that safe space. To use an example of one of my favorite examples of a mega dungeon, you want to put a bat cave on Arkham Asylum? Yes, but you have to like you have to use the resources, invest the time, effort, and energy to put that there and keep other things out of there.
Yeah. Or work with the factions that do control that level, and you know, they can help you by staying safe. And then if any of your rival adventuring party groups are going through, you know who's going to die and who's not. Like working with the factions is a fundamental part of this, because they control the space. This is their world. We will probably get into like the underworld versus the overworld and like the mythic underworld, but like the rules that what we understand and how, like, okay, we've barricaded this door, we're completely safe. Well, maybe those rules don't apply down here. We need to work with the factions who understand how things actually work. And so you should absolutely be using your resources, whether it's something you're carrying in your pack or your negotiation skills.
So iron spikes and hammers. And what are all those empty rooms for? Empty rooms are not just there to be boring filler. An empty room is a place where you can have a wizard shut the door, lean their staff on it, and cast Hold Portal, right? Or you can get out your hammers and spikes and you can spike the door shut. And then, because even normal dungeon delving, even if it's not 5e and you're taking a short rest or a long rest, even normal dungeon delving in 1e, you can only do so much before you need to sit down and have a breather. You need to, especially if there's combat involved, you need to sit down, catch your breath, sharpen your axe, whatever you need to do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then let's go ahead and take this discussion a little bit like somewhere else, because we've all been talking about different mega dungeons. And I know at least one of you, I think maybe two, unless I misheard, two of you guys said that you were making your own or had written your own.
Yep. Yeah. It's fun. It's absolutely, yeah.
I don't know what that process is like. Someone in the chat reminded me that there are random tables to make mega dungeons, and I think everyone knows how I feel about random tables, but I actually, if it's something that big, I like to have something with some sort of through line that's already there for me. It kind of helps.
So
I know that's
a great point, Harmony. The through line, I still use random tables, but I do tie them together. So on my random tables that I generate, it's going to be a 2d6 random encounter table. The roll of 2 or 12 will be an encounter from a level below or above. So that way, like, there's sometimes you might bump into like a little bit of a spoiler. I think it is important to have an idea of a theme for your level. That's what Gary suggests. He says you have to have all the themes for each level and you're ready to go. I'm not quite there. I'm thinking like 1 or 2 levels ahead. But I did use random charts to generate my mega dungeon.
Sure.
Yeah. And sometimes you do have to kind of wiggle and be like, okay, well, this doesn't work here. Or you can just add a secret door sometimes. But yeah, I randomly generated using the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide. I have been generating my old school game Mega Dungeon. I like the 5th edition one more than I like AD&D. AD&D's too looks just silly to me. Yeah, no, I'm gonna raise some hackles, but I don't care, because here's the thing about the 1st edition Dungeon Master's Guide is like everything. It just looks like an octopus. Once it's actually on the map, it looks ridiculous to me. Whereas like the 5e one generates like nice like quadrants and subsections really easily. And it's much easier to read and go through. You do have to kind of scratch out some things, but just because it's like 5th edition specific encounters. Right, so but aside from that,
let's go there. The subject was broached. Dungeon ecology versus mythic underworld. What if the top few layers you use your rational cubist 5th edition DMG, but as we get closer to the bubbling chaos of pure destructive creative energy, you start going more and more to the old school spider octopus. That doesn't make sense. How did that get there style? What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Like,
yeah,
one of the times that I made, and this did not end up being a mega dungeon from size, but I actually made a dungeon that could have turned into a mega dungeon had I put more time and effort into it. It was in Dark Sun. There was an old fortress where some of like the last holdouts of the races that Boris like genocided in Athos. They were holed up in this fortress, and he literally just like had the ground open up and drop the fortress into the underworld. That was something that I could have utilized if I had been a better dungeon master at the time. Is, you get through all of these layers of this fortress, and then now you're in the underworld of Athos, and there's all kinds of weird hell spawn demons and non-Euclidean geometry and all that stuff down, beneath this fortress that a dragon literally had the earth swallow.
So one of the people I was reading on X a couple weeks ago was saying how they believe that the Keep on the Borderlands is a mega dungeon, and I think that they're wrong. But the idea of what they were what they were reaching for is kind of correct, especially when you're considering time and resource management. The idea of like a bunch of smaller micro dungeons that are all kind of interconnected. A lot of those dungeons actually are connected, and so what you're seeing is there's a digestible amount of content that you can interact with. It's not going to be completely eliminated in one setting. You leave the space, you come back to it to finish it off, and then you realize that like the other factions involved have moved into that space, or maybe they've retaliated against you. And Greg Gillespie did. Have you guys read one of his lesser known ones? Is the Caverns of Archaea or Archaea, something like that?
I haven't read that one.
So it's a mega dungeon. It's inspired by Keep on the Borderlands, and each of these, there's the Kobold Cave and the Hobgoblin Cave and the Goblin Cave, and each of them are much bigger than Keep on the Borderlands. It's about 30 to 40 rooms for each of them. And what it encourages you to do is go in, pick a spot that you want to like, pick an enemy that you want to make, get as much treasure as you can, and then get out again. And I think that like those digestible sizes, it's a little bit easier for the players to want to invest their time into than, here's 12 levels. Dunder's got 100 rooms on each level.
Well, can I ask you a question, Scutifer? Yeah. If the Caves of Chaos were all connected instead of little pockets in the canyon, would that make them more close to what you imagine a mega dungeon to be? Is it the fact that
if you look at the map, they actually are connected,
modular, and because like the kobolds, you can clear that out and be done with it.
It's like 5 rooms, right? Yeah.
The goblins, there's the secret passage to the hobgoblin lair, right?
Right, and then there's the actual door. So, and then the goblins also have the ogre lair connected to them. And then if you get up to the higher levels, like around like J and K and L, you'll see that that's just one big dungeon with secret doors connecting them. So, I think that like having clear subsections of the dungeon is going to be much more digestible. And then if like, we stumbled upon this secret entrance to this another level, or we do it the hard way and we grind our way through the primary entrance, either way, it's going to be so much more exciting because you can see it unfolding more like a TV show episodically than this massive thing that like you can't quite wrap your head around. Maybe I'm wrong on this. Maybe people disagree, but I like smaller portions.
Well, to take things in kind of a different direction here, because I'm one of the ones who said I was working on a mega dungeon beforehand. I think this is the point where I'm just going to unleash what I was holding back earlier. What I'm working on is Nighthaven. And to me, Nighthaven is a mega dungeon. For those of you who have never seen me before, don't know me at all, I am currently working on the first entry in a city campaign setting called Nighthaven. And the idea that I'm working with is basically that a city is a dungeon in and of itself. And with a city the size of Nighthaven, you're looking at a mega dungeon. And so the way that works is each section of the city has multiple factions that control certain aspects of it. Each of them have their own layers within the city. There are different places where different things have been destroyed and built over top of that are, there for exploration. There are crypts underneath the city where the dead is buried because there's not like Nighthaven is next to a mountain, so you can't exactly bury people easily. I am the more that I look at the way that I'm designing this city, it's not going to end up like a traditional city campaign. Nighthaven is a mega dungeon that is also a functioning city where people are living. So it's going to be a little different than usual. And this is kind of where that argument that I had with Greg Gillespie stemmed from. The danger is different, but the danger is still ever present and all around you while you're in the city. You will have places that you can make safe, but at the end of the day, when you step out on the street, there is going to be something that could potentially get you, and the ways that you have to defend yourself are limited because you are in a city that is functioning as a regular city.
So I have a question for you, Ryan. How accessible will the faction leaders or like the factions in general be to the players as they're moving through this? Because I see that if I was a player going into a city, I wouldn't know who to trust and who to talk to, first of all. And so I would want my choice to who I align myself to be kind of meaningful or at least obvious. I don't know. So like how accessible will they have like to these different city faction leaders?
They're going to be pretty accessible. The adventure that I have right now, basically as the players are entering the city, the guards pull them aside because they're adventurers, they're dressed like adventurers, and they say, hey, we've got this problem going on in the city. There's a vampire on the loose, not to spoil my own adventure there, but there's a vampire on the loose. We need someone to deal with it. We can't deal with it. Don't ask us why we can't deal with it. But you guys are going to do this for us, or we're going to make your lives hell for as long as you are within the city. And so that's essentially like what they enter into, just to get them involved with the various factions that are at play in the city. But the way I see it is, because there's such a delicate balance of power, whatever the players do, whether they mean to or not, is going to attract attention from one of these elements.
Yes. Nice. Yeah, because city play, it's all about like who's the who, right, in the city.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
who do you want to know? Who do you want to like bump elbows with? And so, yeah, if I was going to be running a mega dungeon in a city, or at least playing in one, I would want to know like who should I be talking to? Who are the movers and the shakers?
Yep.
Running a city dungeon combination has its own like set of design challenges, just because there are so many variables you have to keep track of. You have to keep track of like what all the factions are doing, but like also your monsters and where they're going at the same time. And that seems like it would have like a unique set of design problems, not problems necessarily, but design hurdles that you maybe don't get when you have the city and dungeon separate. So it's definitely an interesting concept. I do kind of want to bring it back to factions, because we started to talk about factions in Mega Dungeons, and I sidetracked us, and Mike just brought a wonderful way to get back to that. I will say, I think one of the Mega Dungeon that does factions best that I have read is Barrowmaze. I really love how they lay it out. They have like all the factions just laid out in the beginning for you. Like, this is who these guys are. This is what they're doing. And I think that's absolutely perfect. But how do you guys keep track of so many factions down in a Mega Dungeon while attempting to run it in real time? Do you guys have any tricks to like keep track of all that, or because it seems like a lot? Not everyone at once. It's okay.
It can be a lot. It's something you have to be very organized with if you're doing it alone. Now, a bunch of people probably on this panel as well, and definitely in chat, are going to be saying patrons. So if you can outsource that work to other people and have them tell you what the factions are doing during downtime, that's definitely a good way to offload that work. But for me, it's just keeping in mind everyone's goal. You write that down somewhere. Everyone has a specific goal that they're after in the circumstance. After the players have acted, you make a record of what they did so that you have it for yourself, and then if you post it somewhere, you post it somewhere. But you have this record for yourself of, here's everything that happened. How do each of these factions, keeping their goals in mind, now respond to it? And then you just kind of write down, they would do this, they would do this, they would do this, they would do this, and then go through and make any appropriate rolls, send any appropriate messages or anything like that comes from their reaction.
Yeah, you absolutely need a notebook. I write down all of the factions in my notebook, and I do pawn off some of the work to patrons. They're just, it's so much easier to run a game when you have people who are thinking about like these smaller subsections of the game 100% of the time, and you're able to kind of take an overview. When I ran Barrow Maze, I tried to hand off the factions to players, and I was like, okay, so just send me orders like where you're gonna so it's broken up into like there's 3 major cults and then a bunch of smaller factions in Barrow Maze. And so I ran the one that was loyal to the god of death, and then I sent the Orcus and Set cult to my friends, and I was like, just send me where you're going to go in the dungeon, how you're going to fortify it, where you're searching for this MacGuffin. And I think that worked for like a week, and then they were just like, all right, now we're going to raid the village and we're going to assassinate the players because they came into our space. And and so yeah, they were like, we're going to take our army over here, we're going to build a keep on the surface, and then that way we can keep an eye on the players. And it went off the rails really quickly. So yeah, when you give it to the patrons, you really do have to accept the fact that the game's over. Like they're going to make with the PCs and the patrons together clashing, it's a lot easier to manage because you're just like, oh, that happened. Okay, I'll write that in the session report.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How about you, Harmony? How do you handle factions? What do you think about that?
Oh, so I actually have a it's not like a notebook, but a planner that I put things in. A lot of times if a faction's working on something, then I'll flip ahead and be like, they'll be done with this at this date, and I'll just put it in my planner and not think about it until I flip to that day, and I'm like, oh. But normally I try to have conflict going on lower levels. But see, the problem is if the mega dungeon is just a structure in a broader world, then I'm not sure whether or not it's appropriate to hand them off to actual players in the game or whether you want external patrons. But even then, external patrons that runs the risk of making the mega dungeon a much more imposing fixture upon the campaign than maybe I intended, because in my world it is just one thing in a broader world, and my players are mostly interested in overworld play, and sometimes they will delve into the mega dungeon when they're just like, let's try this again, we're a little stronger, we're not gonna goad the orcs this time. So I don't want to run the risk of like making it a necessity. Oh, you have to go back here now because I just handed these orcs off to patrons, and yeah, you don't want to know what's happened to the village next to it. So,
well, another thing you could do.
Sorry, go ahead, man. Go ahead.
Oh, just something you could do, because you view the mega dungeon as kind of a side part of a larger campaign, and maybe don't want to necessarily have patrons down there. Once players decide to go back there, then you think about, okay, how long has it been? What happened last time they were there? And then you kind of play out, what has each faction done in the time since they last showed up? How have they interacted with each other? So basically, essentially keep that place in limbo until the players go back. And then once they go back, and maybe, I'm going to use the P word here, during prep time for the session, go through and see what these factions did, or what the relevant factions did while the players were gone from this region. And then when they go in, they're like, oh, this all has changed.
That's a lot of what I end up doing, actually, is I use one-to-one time for my Godsting campaign, and there are a lot of like smaller dungeons or bigger dungeons that they'll visit and they won't think about again, but then like maybe they get they get beat up in there pretty good. And so they decide to come back like 2 months later. Well, I'm not keeping track of what's going on there in 2 months for 2 months. Like I don't have time for that. But when they decide to go back there, I make a few quick rolls to see, all right, were these guys successful at defending their position? Did any monster come in and take it over for himself? Like, how is this different this time? And I try to do about the same thing. Like I make different rolls for the factions to determine like how successful or unsuccessful they may have been, is generally what I end up doing.
I think factions are weird in a mega dungeon. I feel like they solve a game problem, but it's weird for me to think of a bottled up location that's either not already had all the treasure removed or has these people that basically live in a sealed off environment. Right? Like, I feel like it's one of those awkward things that you just kind of have to not look at too closely for the sake of fun. My friend Andy, I asked him, do you have any questions about Mega Dungeons before we started the episode? And he said, I've never played through one, but how do you make it lifelike? How do you make it lived in? And I feel like factions is one of the answers to that, so that you're not just doing every room has the same goblins in it because this is a goblin dungeon, right? Factions is like, well, it's living, there's things going on, there's moving parts, there's people in conflict, and like it's a game solution. And we don't have to go off of factions just yet, but what other answers do you guys have for my friend Andy's question? How do you make the mega dungeon feel lived in? And
so that's a great question, and it's fundamental to the overall success of running a mega dungeon. First of all, you need to be restocking the dungeon every time the players go into it, but also reshaping it, excavating new tunnels, closing off old ones. You don't want anything to become rote for the players, because even with multiple entrances in and out, the players are going to have a very good idea of exactly where they want to go, and they're going to try to move there as quickly as they can. And if you're restocking it with treasure, monsters, and reshaping the dungeon, you're going to keep them guessing. And it's going to feel more alive if they go in and it's not static. Another thing you can do is, according to like what the players are interested in, specifically like pick one player who said, like they really like this drow thing, or maybe they're attached to like getting revenge on the drow in some way. And you tie that one PC to protecting or destroying that faction. And then in the same play group, you tie another PC into that opposite action of protecting or destroying that faction. And so what happens is at the player level, they're butting heads on how to interact with this group, and they start plotting against each other and working with the factions. So if they're in constant contact with the people that are down there, then it's a lot more lived in, and there's a lot more news coming out of that space. And so it won't kind of fall into the background of like, oh yeah, we haven't gone there in a couple months, what have they been up to? Every session report you write has the update, because the players are directly tied to those factions in some way.
I also think it's helpful to think about a mega dungeon. What's a mega dungeon to your players is probably someone's home. And so to think about, and I know, I shudder to recommend reading any of this stuff because it's mostly slop. But when you read the Dark Elf trilogy by R.A. Salvatore, you get the sense of Menzoberranzan, which to a D&D player would be a mega dungeon. If you walked into Menzoberranzan or anywhere in the Underdark, you would be in a mega dungeon. It's Dritzt's family's home. And so you get to know kind of how the Dark Elf faction interacts with the others. And then you get to see some of the other factions that are out there, some of the other, weird things you encounter in the Underdark as the trilogy goes on. But I feel like that's kind of a good picture of how to make these things feel lived in, is understand that this level of a mega dungeon, yes, it's level 3 of your mega dungeon. It is the entire world to the people that live on this section, though.
Yeah. You have to make it feel lived in. You have to make it. There should be trash, graffiti. My favorite thing is having more than one group delving into it, like on a week to week basis. So
tennis shoes hanging from power lines.
Right. So the group that goes in is going to see what the other group left over. So like if they set off a fireball, then suddenly this is like the burned, charred room with rubble and everything. Like a mega dungeon shouldn't be static. It should be constantly changing. And it should feel like you are not the first adventurers here. You're not the second. You're not even the 20th. The deeper you go, the more that feeling goes away because you might be treading where nobody has gone before. But
maybe you're still insignificant,
up near the top.
But now you're an explorer. Yeah.
Right.
I love that.
That's something I like.
I feel like Stonehell does a good job of letting you know right up front with like graffiti and like there's even special graffiti. There's one room that has there's a magic item called flame chalk. And if someone's written in flame chalk, most people won't be able to see it. But if you're in the dark, anything with infravision will be able to read what was written in the flame chalk. Right. So now like the dwarves and elves are a little bit special because they can see that. Right. But the idea that like you're going through, there's like burned out armor, there's like just rusted holy weapons and all kinds of stuff just there's like you can tell there's been a fight in this hallway and it didn't go well for someone and it was a long time ago. And then as that stuff gradually diminishes, you can kind of turn up that feeling that, okay, we're starting to get places where they haven't gotten yet. And then that brings its own kind of excitement where it's like, we're the first ones to see this.
Did you guys see the video that John Mollison made about the mythic underworld and how it spreads to the surface world?
I want to get to that, Scutifer, but one other thought that I had is like part of the treasure for those top levels can be maps where like maybe you're even in the setting before you get to the dungeon and like everyone's like, oh, that that guy over there sitting in the Aragorn booth in the corner of the tavern, he's actually been on a delve in Stonehell. And you can go over to him and talk to him, and he's got the twitches because of what happened and stuff, and he'll sell you a map. And like you could even take like a map of the first level and then just erase a bunch of crap and say, okay, well, he only made it into these rooms. And like that can be part of the treasure. Or maybe you run into some other NPCs in the dungeon, and instead of killing them, they get a good reaction roll. And maybe you can trade for part of their map. Or it's like, well, let's share maps and I'll write out what you have. And then they can get a glimpse ahead into some of the rooms. And that could be another dial that you turn down as they get farther and farther into the stuff where it's like, yeah, we went into that dungeon 8 times. We never saw the stuff you're talking about. That's, like that we're breaking new ground feeling. I love it.
Yeah, Robocopter says use a pencil on that graph paper. He's absolutely correct. Be ready to erase and reshape. I did. So I'm Dunder. You're saying they found this part of the map, but for me, like I'm building the dungeon one room at a time. So I don't know where I'm going with this. It's just kind of forming itself. But I think that I had a point I wanted to make, and I think
you could have a wizard cast erase on the map as soon as you hand it to him.
Yeah. Okay. There it is. Yeah. So I put it all in pencil, and then I graphed it with ink, and then what I did was I photocopied that, and now I'm like taking a highlighter using different colors and like I'm scratching things out with new markers. And so I have the original maps for all of the levels, and then I'm photocopying so I can like make all the changes because I want to preserve what I've done and also reflect the changes of the players. So, yeah.
All right. So you were talking about randomly generating parts of your mega dungeon, Mike. And I think it was Macho Mandoff asked in the chat, what do you think about using Appendix A for that?
Right. So I'm using the 5th edition Appendix A.
Oh.
And it is amazing. Like it's so much fun. Everything feels very organized, and the flow of creating a room into a chamber and like checking each door, it's laid out very well in the 5th edition DMG. And so it's a step-by-step process. Did I do A, B, C, and D? Okay, I can move on to the next room. I'm not trying to dog on the 1st edition Appendix A. I know people hold it in high reverence. I don't like the shapes that the that the hallways and the passages take, the corridors, and like trying to determine like the area and the circumference of a room to know like it's boring. I don't care about that. I just want to know like, you know, how long is it? How tall is it? We're good to go. Okay. And that's gonna earn me some friends in the Broasar for sure.
I have to respond to this one. Thank you so much, Tag, for the $5. He just popped in to say dungeons are a mini game stapled onto a war game and should be treated as such. He will watch the video tomorrow. Have a good night. You have a good night too, Tag. Thank you again. And
I'd like to respond to Scutifer Mike's comments about the first edition Appendix A. I don't know how Jeffro built his dungeon, and I've got magic I've got like magic goggles because that was like my first time playing first edition, and
the Godfather is with me on this one,
right?
So.
I don't think that he did just strict Appendix A because it felt like there was a much higher density of really weird and interesting rooms, like a room full of red crystals that if you try to cast a spell around them, they will just suck the spell in and it won't go off. And then they start flashing and then they detonate. So like the first time I went through that room, I was with people who'd been there before. They were like, don't cast any magic in here. I was like, okay, I don't know if that was randomly rolled up or if maybe he already randomly rolled up something and then went back through and put stuff. But like there is a certain amount of prep that is just fun off the wall stuff. And you can get fun off the wall stuff from Appendix A. Like he has special rooms in there and there are, but I feel like the probabilities are such that you can go for a long time without getting something weird and fun like that. You can get a lot of empty rooms. You can get a lot of just standard room with a monster and treasure, room with just treasure, room with a trap, room with a trick, you know, stairs up, stairs down. I feel like it is pure gold for when the players blow through the content you had already mapped out or take a turn that you hadn't expected. And then you've got something that you can just grab and roll with them while they're there. But yes. I do think, I mean, here, this is meat. This is for spiritually mature gamers. This is not the milk. If you have a prep addiction, your best steps now is to learn those tables and learn how to run no prep.
Yeah.
Once you've done that, once you've mastered grammar and composition, scansion and meter, then you can be E.E. Cummings and write your poems without capitalization or punctuation, but not when you don't know how to use that stuff. So once you've walked the path of the no prepper and you know that no matter what your players throw at you, you can give them a good night gaming, even if they don't take your hooks. Then you can say, all right, now how can I, knowing what I know, how can I add spice and pizzazz? How can my prep be something I know won't be wasted, something that I know will add value and won't rip my soul out of my body when the players all immediately ignore what I wanted them to do?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with don't try to write Blood Meridian when you barely know the alphabet.
I think that is the best articulated. I have heard the no prep argument. I don't think people are really pushing to like play a whole campaign with zero prep. I do think it's more a matter of learn how to run no prep and then start prepping, and you can use your prep time to greater effect. That is what I have found.
Put Jeffro's coming up.
Oh, what did he say? The model for how to do things derives from Infocom's Zork text adventure, not the random tables. We all have our sources.
Yep.
That's funny.
Right. So I want to kind of talk about some of our favorite published Megadungeons, because I definitely have a favorite, and I think people know what my favorite is. But I want to know, what are your guys' favorite? What is your guys' number one favorite published Megadungeon, and sell me on it? Like, why is it good? Mike gets a get out of jail free card on this one. He can answer when he gets back.
So like Barrel Maze is really good. I enjoy Barrel Maze. And this is coming from someone who does not read a lot of Megadungeons just because I don't read a lot of modules. It's just how it's been in my gaming career. But there's one that I played in that was written by a good friend of mine named Skeeter Green called Crypt of the Science Wizard. This is a DCC MCC mega dungeon that he's been working on for years. And it is absolutely cuckoo bananas insane, which is why I think it's probably my favorite published dungeon. There is a level where we walked in and immediately were bombarded by camouflaged octopuses or octopi that when they bit you and got their venom into you, you just turned into a rage monster. In the next room, once you get past that hallway, there is what is basically Galactus standing at a control panel, just pulling random switches, turning knobs and stuff, and he'll completely ignore you unless you do what my character did after being jacked up on octopus venom and go attack him, and then he'll stomp your ass. The next room over is a giant server room filled with signs, like the workplace signs of like the guy bending over with the back pain telling you like not to lift things without a lifting belt, and then the creatures on those signs come to life and attack you in various ways. So like it's just gonzo bizarre nonsense, but it's so hilarious and fun, and so that's why it's probably my favorite.
Where can we find that one?
You can find it on DriveThruRPG. It is called Crypt of the Science Wizard, and it was Skeeter Green who wrote that particular dungeon.
That is an excellent name.
Skeeter Green. I like that.
Skeeter
Yeah.
Green.
Yeah, no, that's good. All right, Dundermoose, what is your favorite mega dungeon? If you had to pick one, published mega dungeon, and sell me on it.
Published one. That's difficult. I've not played all the ones that I own. I went through an OSR phase where I bought a yard of books and unplayed books. But they're like, as a player, I look at it one way. As someone that just likes to read, like, what does it make that makes a mega dungeon fun to read? And then, like, what is it that gets you excited to play it? The first time I read Barrow Maze, I got really excited to play it. But the last two that I read are the ones that are vying for it right now. Anomalous Subsurface Environment. There are some just kooky things in here that are so fun to play with. I love a room where there is like a big threat that's there, like in stasis somehow, and then there's a big button on the wall.
Oh yeah,
and you know the players are gonna push it, right? I did. My buddy Andy had me do that in Numenera, where there was a Calorail, which I don't know if you know what that is, but like just picture like a picture of King Kong had a baby with the Thing from Fantastic Four, and that's what a Calorail is. And it was like behind a plate of glass with a button, right? And we pushed it, and then we all had to run for our lives. In this one, the thing that's there is this. It's called a Sasquatron. It is a Bigfoot with a crab claw for one arm. Its head is like a onyx pillar, and it's got a fishbowl over it, and the pillar's full of jewels. So if you kill the thing, you can take his helmet off and get like a ton of money from it. But that's just sitting in a room in a stasis field with a button, you know, that kind of stuff. I don't want to.
What is it with the Broasar and monkeys? I don't get it. Like we always have giant apes.
Oh yeah,
Do you?
It comes up a lot. Usually the white multi-armed ones.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's rooms that have like colored mist in them, and if you go in it, like the doorway, the mist goes solid, so only one person can go in each room at a time. And
we were talking about giant apes and mist, and I was wondering if there were gorillas in the mist.
Of course.
Okay, that's enough.
Well,
that
the mist one, I can't remember. There's like either a glyph on the wall that you have to touch, or there's a bowl that you have to drink, or something that you do. And each room will do a different thing to you. And some of them are amazing. Like a random stat goes up by one. right?
Yeah.
And some of them are horrible. Like an immortal monkey drops down onto your back, and you can't dislodge it. It doesn't do any damage, but it just screeches everywhere you go. And it lasts for 24 hours before it just dies and falls off. So it's like the crazy stuff that can happen that's just hilarious and weird. And one guy got a good one, and oh man, you were in the yellow room, and this happened to you now. I don't know why. That just lights me up, and maybe I just want to laugh at my players. So that's why I'm tempted to go with Anomalous Subsurface Environment. And I've only read the first book, which is half setting in one level. So with one level, he's hooked me. But again,
nice.
I'm worried about that one. He released level 1, and then he released levels 2 and 3 in the second book, and that was like 2014. So I don't know if we're getting 4, 5, and 6. I don't know if he's just moved on or what. The thing I like about this one, and this is the one I think is one of your favorites, Harmony, if not your favorite.
Yeah, it's my favorite.
Let me see if I can find for the level. You get like a master map of this level, and it's 4 quadrants, and each quadrant has its own theme, but they are interconnected, so you can get from one to the other. And it tells you there's 3 ways you can use this book, right? Like you can just run it as written, you can take what you want from it, or you could just replace one of the quadrants on each level with your own thing and just make sure that the exits line up, and then it gives you some freedom to just play with it and that kind of thing. The thing I like about Stonehell is it doesn't have a big Orcus at the end. It doesn't have the Temple of the Frog God or whatever that, like, you can't beat the dungeon by killing the big bad at the end. It's just there, right? Same thing I think with Anomalous Subsurface Environment. The thing just exists. I mean, I think there is kind of a animating spirit in Stonehell that, like, I don't want to do too much spoilers. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't have the second part, so I don't know if you can kill it. This one is complete. If you buy this book and the second one on Lulu, you got the whole Mega Dungeon. This one, I feel like this is a good starting spot, and then you can Scutifer Mike it, Ryan Howard it, make your own Mega Dungeons when you get to the edges. The other thing that I like about Barrow Maze and this one is they have these little collectible things that do something. I think in Barrow Maze it's masks, right?
Yeah,
the valuable masks
Shulk
you can
masks.
find, and they each have crazy impact on the game. And in Anomalous Subsurface Environment, there's these crystal skulls with 3 holes on the bottom. And like there's certain portals where they have 3 posts, and if you put the right color skull on it, it'll do something. And if you put the wrong color skull on it, it'll just kind of vibrate and shoot sparks until you pull it off again. So sorry that you asked me for 1 and I gave you 3. I think the one I'm most excited about right now is Anomalous Subsurface Environment.
Yeah. I'm going to piggyback off you and go on Stonehell now. Okay, my Stonehell rant. All right, so my favorite Mega Dungeon is usually the last one I've read. That's just how I am. My favorite movie is usually the last one I've watched. For a while, my favorite Mega Dungeon was Barrow Maze because it was the last one I'd read. But I didn't realize what I was missing until I think it was only like maybe a month ago. Somebody on Twitter was like, "Hey, you should check out Stonehell." And I looked it up, and you know what? It was like $7. That thing is cheap. And so I picked it up, and right away what grabbed me was the layout. The layout is beautiful. Like all I have to do is like look over and I know what's where. It has the map. Here, show one of the floors because it has. I'm gonna make you big, Dundermoose. Here, you deserve to be big. No, that's me. How do I make you big? I don't know. That's me. I don't know how to. Here, you come there. There we go. All right. Yeah. Look at that. That has the map. Right next to it, you have a random monster table. Then underneath it, you have the key. And you have like the random tables on the level, like just squished onto like one spread.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
There's like
and
a
just
little
the
bit of
layout
stuff
alone.
before it. There's like some overview stuff. And then the next page is a 2-page spread that has all your keys. Everything on that level for that quadrant will be on the same page.
Layout of that is, you can tell he prioritized usability.
For those, you do have to write your own page numbers on, because for whatever reason he leaves those blank. So
Oh, what? I have the PDF, so I didn't notice. But
Yeah, you have to make it your
oh,
own by writing your own page numbers
oh,
every now and then.
oh, well, we can do that. You're on top now, but that's just how it is. Um,
Everything's coming up,
but
Dunder.
I'm not
I
touching that one.
liked that
Never
one.
mind.
I like that one for for two reasons. One was the layout. I just thought the layout was so incredibly usable compared to every other dungeon I have read. And I didn't know what I was missing with things like with like 2E Undermountain or Borrow Maze. I didn't even know what I was missing until I saw the layout of Stonehell. I just thought it was beautiful. But I mean, there was that, and then I love the slow descent into madness in Stonehell. The first couple levels are like, well, they're well traveled, like lots of people have been there, but then like, I mean, it starts to get a little weird around level 2 because you have this like burning preacher that starts yelling at you and stuff. But then
I only read
beyond
level
that,
1.
oh, okay. But beyond that, it gets weirder and weirder and weirder. And I enjoy the Master of Stonehell. I really, really enjoy it. It's I don't want to give it away because I don't know who's gonna play it, but I don't know if my players are like listening. But
You did a whole video on this on the
did
entrance.
on the intro. Just the entrance. The entrance is great.
The cool thing about it is it's evocative of Keep on the Borderlands.
Yeah, I was about
Yes,
to
it
say
is.
that it looks like the Keep on the Borderlands. Yeah,
It's way steeper though. It's limestone cliffs. It's a box canyon.
I think
and it's got
I think
a wall.
everybody who looks at that map thinks Keep on the Borderlands. And which I don't know if it was made specifically to be like a an alternative to the Caves of Chaos. I'm not certain about that. It might have been, but I mean, it definitely evokes about the same thing. But it's just, I did a whole video on the entrance. I loved it, but I love that whole thing. I just think it's so well done. Anyway, I'll stop ranting. Mike, what is your favorite Mega Dungeon? Sell us on it.
Okay, so we actually haven't talked about it yet. It's The Hole in the Oak by Gavin Norman. It's the first old school essentials module. Now it's small for Mega Dungeon. It's only 60 rooms, and it is in itself. On page number 2, Gavin starts with, "This is a mythic underworld dungeon. Nothing here is going to make sense to your players. Lean into that. It's goofy, it's off the wall, but it's not gonzo. You feel like you're in fairyland. There are goat-headed people who are also cannibals. They'll invite you in for tea and scones and then try to eat you. There is a mutagenic ogre, which is like that really powerful force that's roaming around in the dungeon that the players cannot deal with. It's a level 1 dungeon, and the ogre is like 6 HD. So like if he even looks at you, he can mutate you and change you and like ruin your character. And so you have to negotiate well with him. There are gnomes, and so they take the gnomes and they twist them into evil heretic cultists. And so they're where most players are like, oh, okay, we can negotiate with these gnomes and make a deal. Like they're gonna sacrifice you to their bloody stump that is animated. So it is an awesome and fun adventure. I've run it multiple times, I think 3 times all the way through. No party has uncovered every room, but every time I go through it with a new group of players, it's a completely unique adventure. And you guys were talking about how playability is key. This was the first dungeon that OSE made. And so it's lacking the key feature that OSE is renowned for now, which is playability. They now, every page that you go into, they will have a part of the map represented on the page. And so you see, like, this is the area that the players are discovering right now. Here's the room layouts for that part of the area. It is beautifully done. And so at the beginning of the modules, they always have like the full map, but as you turn the page, you can see like the subsection of the map where you are. So, you know, if you're using Theater of the Mind, you can really navigate yourself really well. Old School Essentials is amazing. It is a BX clone, but I think it's an amazing system, and you should definitely be supporting Necrotic Gnome which is the company that makes Old School Essentials.
It was called Hole in the Oak.
Yeah, the Hole in the Oak. It's amazing. It's such a good dungeon.
I also want to plug this one. Build as a Kilo dungeon. Secrets of the Nether City. Especially with Axe the Imperial Imprint is coming out, and we got a Kickstarter live for their treasure tome. This one has a whole appendix full of treasure just for the for this mega dungeon. But this is kind of like what Ryan was talking about as far as like a city as mega dungeon. I think this one's under a city. Here's like the it's kind of a crazy map, but oh hey, I'm huge.
Yeah.
So, and while I'm big, you guys can see that. I don't know if it's focused or whatever. Got some sweet art on there.
Yeah, that's sweet.
And that kind of answers the question too about like factions and not being all sealed up. If your city is the mega dungeon, it's like, well, you got factions and they can breathe and they can import and export and move around and stuff. So sorry to jump in and double dip on that one. Oh, I do have Dwimmermount. I haven't read it yet, Jeffro.
He also recommended that one to me. It's kind of next on my list, but man, I hate reading so many mega dungeons when I can only run like one or two, right?
Forever to run, and there's a ton of good ones.
Right.
You know?
You got to pick carefully.
So, but talking about Dwimmermount, talking about anomalous subsurface environment. This is a question I want to put to the group because it's one I've thought about and wrestled with. How do you guys feel about the inclusion of stuff that is not the dungeon in the game? Anomalous subsurface environment has its own setting, right? The city of 1,000 towers. It tells you can disregard that, but that's the first half of the first book. If I recall, Barrow Maze, it has several overland locations. Dwimmermount has like a hex map, is huge. Tannisborg as well. What do you guys think about the inclusion of a setting in your mega dungeon? Is it wasted? Do you like it? Do you need it? Do you immediately skip to level 1 of the mega dungeon? How do you guys feel about that stuff? Harmony, go first.
I'm of two minds on this because I don't like the inclusion of a setting, especially if it's very tied to the mega dungeon, just because I am likely to drag and drop it into my game. And if the setting doesn't work for my game, then it just makes the whole mega dungeon not work for my game. But on the other hand, I think the town of Helix was actually my favorite part of Barrow Maze, it can go either way for me. I'm less likely to use it, I think, if it is tied to a setting, just because I will probably put it in my own setting. And the more ties it has to the setting that it's made for, the harder that becomes. I mean, you can usually just reskin stuff and it's not a big deal. But I normally play it for the dungeon. I kind of like, man, I'm going to plug it again. I kind of like Stonehill's approach of here are some rumors and here are some quests you can use. You can put them anywhere, whatever. At the beginning, so
yeah, Stonehill does not waste any time. It's like,
no,
here's where the dungeon is. Here's how you get started. Go.
Yep. I enjoy that because it allows the DM to do the work of putting it into their setting. But on the other hand, if the setting is good enough, I say do it. Like I said, Helix, I think, is the best part of Barrow Maze.
All right, so I think if you're gonna... and Ryan, you guys are writing your own. How do you think about the setting piece of it?
So I think if you're going to do it, you can't half-ass it. You have to like really put time and effort into, making that setting something that's worth caring about, because otherwise you're, wasting space. And yeah, some players like Harmony are going to just take that and put it in their own setting, and that's fine. It's good to have that modularity as well. But I do feel like, having deep thematic ties that reward players who spend time in preparation in the overland before they go into the underworld, so that they have a little bit of that information and, it can help them in certain places, or, just, gathering information, bringing the right people down with you, that sort of thing. I feel like, that also comes with its own set of rewards, and putting that there for players who are willing to use those resources, I think is, something that's worthwhile. So if you're going to do it right.
Yeah. I think that's definitely one way to look at it.
So I have two experiences. With the Barrow Maze campaign, I took Helix, the Pantheons, everything. I just took all of it. And the players loved it. They, especially the gods, the time that they spent talking about the world that Greg Gillespie made and the amount that they invested in perpetuating those overworld factions was a significant part of our downtime play. This time, we are using the Holy Catholic Church and some world, like I made up some of our like evil demon gods or whatever. The players have not engaged with it at all. There's a little bit with the elves versus the dwarves, but for the most part, I think that if you're a writer and you're really good and you include that information in your mega dungeon, people who are not very original or good at writing like myself would benefit well from those from that content being included. I know I'm of two minds. I want my players to like the things that I made, but it's just less interesting than people who are good at writing can do. So
I'm curious, Mike, how was the cognitive load? Because Helix has places, it has a bunch of NPCs. You get like character, they draw their profiles and stuff. Was it hard to keep track of all of them and what they were doing and what they were up to, or did that come natural? Like, how much of it do you put on a DM when you're picking up one of these things? And like, what is the risk that your party gets so interested in the overworld that they never make it to the big mega dungeon that's supposed to be the tent pole of your campaign?
Well, I use those NPCs to like maximum effect. So for me, like I've read that book so many times, I can't even tell you how many times I've read it, and it's huge. Okay. I just love it. So like I absorbed a lot of it, but I use the NPCs to tie the players into the campaign. So like they couldn't train without Mazza the Magnificent. Like, so it was easy for me to keep track of Mazza because they needed him for spells, right? Mm-hmm. The guy who makes the Fletcher, who makes the magic bows or whatever, the +1 bows, like everybody wanted a +1 bow. So, he was in the campaign a lot.
Yeah.
The
I'm
church
thinking of like
itself
the three girls
took on a life of its own.
They work in I had a hard time keeping some of the characters apart because they just didn't seem that distinct. Like one of them's a spy for another overworld location that doesn't have anything to do with the dungeon. And it's like, well, a lot of those characters can go down there, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, a lot of those characters can be like cannibalized by each other and just turn them into one NPC. I did use all of like the hooks in some way over 2 years. Some of it didn't come out right away. In fact, like there's a half orc who works for the church who is like so I actually turned him into like something. Well, the players were the ones who were really interested in him. And so he turned into be like some evil, like, megalo, like evil warlord. And so it's really just kind of lean into like what the players are interested in, but like pick a few that will be trainers for your PC. So you have to use them and the players have to engage with them. And then those will be your threads to spread the story. But again,
does 5e
your players are not going to be interested. What's that?
There is an optional rule for it in the DMG. Some people use it, some don't. I think the overwhelming proportion of 5e groups don't use training. I do, but I'm special. So
the other thing cool about Barrow Maze is it takes a page out of, literally takes pages out of the what's the big one that kills everybody? The Tomb of
Annihilation?
Tomb of Horrors.
Tomb of Horrors.
Yeah, ooh. Barrow Maze has a section of player handout illustrations, and I just love that. There is something about like when they hit that first crypt and they're like climbing down it, and you can like hand them. This is what you see when you look down the south tunnel. Like that's pretty sweet, I gotta say.
Yes.
My favorite parts of Barrow Maze were the town of Helix and that one tomb that had the fallen paladin in it. That like, that was like I can't remember what his name was. I stole him. I put him in my campaign.
Victus or something like that. Yeah, he's great. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I loved him. So someone in chat actually, speaking of illustrations and stuff, brought up a thing we haven't talked about yet, and this will probably be the last topic we touch on. I don't know, we'll see. This is Oaks Spalding. He says, "I feel like time is running out. Talk about mapping." So, do you guys give your players a map of the dungeon? Do you make them use a mapper? How do you? Yeah, yeah,
You have to use a mapper.
yeah,
Mapper.
okay.
Like I love it. I love to see. So they post the maps on Discord, and they'll be like, okay, so this is what this group found, and they'll try to like, they're doing their best, and I describe what they see because it takes time for them to find out what's in the room, and that's random encounter checks, and so what they come up with, oftentimes it depends on who's the mapper, but we have one guy who listens to every little detail of what I say. He gets these maps like 95% correct. I am amazed. But then you get the guys like me where it's like I'm like I didn't even hear, he was describing the room the whole time. I didn't hear any of that. I'm just going to draw a square here. It's yeah, so I mean, like, yeah, absolutely they need to use a mapper. I'm so glad I'm the DM most of the time because I don't have to map.
I go back and forth on it. I've done it both ways. Some groups they don't like it. They're just like, give us a map. What are you doing? Like every other DM gives us a map. Why are you not giving us a map? But other groups adapt to it fairly easily. I think it kind of depends. You have to have the right personality type. It depends on if you're running like a beer and pretzels game, I think, or an actual like campaign of that has people in it who are willing to put in the effort of being the mapper. Because I've had that fall flat before. I hate to say it, but I have.
Yeah, I like having a mapper. I like having them draw it out. I feel like there's stuff that Theater of the Mind can do that minis will never do well.
Yeah.
For a mega dungeon, man, how many tiles would you have to create? Unless you're doing like a Professor Dungeon Master universal like tile, his big circle that he does. Unless you're doing something like that with like little walls, you'd have to have so much just to represent all the crazy kooky shapes. I mean, maybe if you're using the 5th edition DMG and it's all squares, it's a lot easier if you're playing it on easy mode like Scutifer Mike. But like it can get hard when you get the weird shapes too, and you're trying to describe it as a DM, and you're like, okay, it's kind of like a bean with one large lobe to the north. But like if you're plopping down like tiles for them to put their minis on, then there's like no mystery or whatever. And then I'm not the first one to point this out. It's been said a few times that like when you play with minis, even if you're abstracting it and you've just got a grid and like little gray unpainted figurines, they're still going to remember the toys on the table. Whereas if it's all Theater of the Mind, you activate that imagination and they get to imagine it for themselves. Ryan, how do you handle the mapping part of it?
You definitely need to have someone in the party mapping things out. And I find this like when you randomly generate dungeons, and I talked about this not too terribly long ago with Crafty Matt and then Orcus Dorcas. It was actually his show that we were on. When you are randomly generating dungeons, you, along with the players, are having that experience of you hold your torch out and then you see for the first time like what's coming down this path, or you see where the tunnel branches. Now you can still create that when you as the dungeon master know what the map is, or you're running a published mega dungeon, but the players need to have that experience no matter what. You can't take that away from them. Of we turn to the left and what do we see? What it's not, oh hey, this passage over here on the map looks like it might be the way out. You need to have that presence of mind of I am inside a cave, or I am down a dark alley. I'm somewhere where I have no idea what's around the next corner, and so I'm going to now look around the next corner. What do I see? That is extremely important, if not like the most important aspect of this whole thing. Without that, this whole thing falls apart.
Yeah.
It's the feeling of being lost. Like you don't
Yes.
get any. It feels to me like actually looking down at a mapped version of the dungeon already. You don't feel lost. You feel like, well, we just need to take these paths back easy. And I wonder where all these paths lead to. It's something, I will be honest, it's something, it's a learning curve running without something like that. It's difficult to do. But I think if you have the right player attention and engagement, it does work, and it gives a feeling unlike any other. Like I said, I've done it both ways, and I've had groups that don't like playing without a map. They're like, what are you doing? Like, how are we supposed to remember this? We're not going to map this. But I mean, wrong one. Sar Bombadil says they should be asked politely but firmly to leave.
No, I saw a comment about an hour ago I saw a comment about an hour ago in the chat, and it was asking, do you allow the players to, at the end of session, to just leave the dungeon, or do you like roll something for that? And it comes back to mapping, and I was gonna bring it up in the moment, but I forgot. What I have my players do, I do roll the random encounters as they're making their way out, but I have them describe to me the rooms in which they're going, and like, oh, you're going to go through the room with the fountain up north this way, because there's multiple exits, and if they didn't map it, and if they can't remember where things are going, you got lost. So it does matter. Mapping is really important, and it's also fun. It's not fun for me. I'm bad at it, but it's fun for the people who like it. And you should let them have that, and also challenge people like me to get better at it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and there's rules in 1E that, like, if you're moving through an area that you've already been through, that you can go at a much greater speed. So if you're trying to haul and just boogie with your gear, with your loot, that makes it easier for the return journey. Now, you still are going to have to make those both dungeon and overland encounter checks to see if something stops you. And like, no spoilers, but like, there's a fun one in Stonehell. There's like a place where you can get ambushed from on your way out of the dungeon. That's pretty hilarious.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, my players love that one, and they already know that I'm going to ambush them there.
I've got to read it.
But I like what
it's a good one.
What Jeffro was saying about Dwimmermount. Dwimmermount suggests letting the players buy and sell maps. If they got to a dungeon level first, they could just make money for leveling just from the mapping. Then the next one, but then other parties will be more likely to show up on a level where the map has been sold for back in town. So there's that risk reward thing. Be like, man, I can level just from making the maps. The other thing I like about maps is maybe you're in a situation where your players are starting to get tired of the mega dungeon. Right. And maybe you're like worried, they're going to stop going before they get to the cool stuff that I know is just around the corner. Well, maybe they find a map in town, or someone sells them one that happens to have a rod of what's the stuff that wizards always want to have, like a staff of striking or bracers of protection, something that can help you figure out what there's scrolls for spells that you don't know yet down there. Put that on a map and let them find it. The map could be accurate or it could be a little bit off, but that might be just
an artifact.
That might be just the hook to get your cleric or your thief or your wizard to go, maybe we should go back down there.
Dude, my players asked kobolds for a map. They didn't map, and they found a group of kobolds in the dungeon, and they're like, "Do you know your way around?" They're like, "Yeah, of course. Can you draw us a map?" And they're like, "Yeah." And I brought up MS Paint and started screaming at them. Started drawing like really bad, like "you are here," and
literally doodling on the cave wall with feces.
Yes.
Well, when we play on Discord, Brigadine uses Dungeon Scrawl to draw maps as they're described. So we do have, it is, if you're playing online, that is a little easier but there's nothing like the graph paper and a mechanical pencil. Crafty Matt says no one has mentioned Castles in Tillion. I do have that one. Again, I haven't read it. It's part of the shame pile of shame on my shelf.
Sad. I haven't read that one either.
And then because we limited it to published ones, I didn't say my actual favorite.
Okay.
What is
your
I didn't
actual
limit it to
favorite?
published ones. You did.
Nobody said that. You did that.
My actual favorite is Trilopulus. All of it. There is a mountain range that Macho Mandolf has. He used the Appendix A rules, but instead of making dungeon rooms and stuff, he made canyons and pathways, and like he made it's called the Bandit Mountains. Again, some of my favorite moments of gaming is when Jeffro was DMing and we were going down into that stupid collection of one-page dungeons that that had Belbaz the Magnificent, and he had a menagerie, and he had burrow owls, and he had the flail snail shell, and like just all this crazy crap. And I count that as a mega dungeon because I know he could have gone on and on and on with it, just using his one-page dungeons and Appendix A and Zork or whatever he was drawing on. That was my favorite, all-time favorite.
I may have heard enough about that particular dungeon that I completely stole the concept and put it in my Godstein game.
Yeah. The stuff that happened was mean and hilarious.
Oh, I know. I've heard all about that one.
And if you guys want to hear about it too, you can go to his blog, jeffro.wordspace.com or something. I can't remember. Jeffro, put your blog in the
your session. Log all sessions, write everything down. You will forget
start with the one called The Hole in the Sky. I mean, Trilopulus counts as a mega dungeon because the whole thing is inside the Metamorphosis Alpha spaceship. All of Trilopulus is just one deck on this giant spaceship that's hurtling through a Traveler universe of all things. So
nice.
But yeah, Bros Are Bros blog receipts. You guys running your own stuff. Record it, not just for you, but for your players, something they can go back and fondly remember.
Right.
And for other people that want to know how this stuff works, they're looking in from the outside and they want to see how it works.
Yep. Mm-hmm. If you're running a campaign that's going to be lasting years, which is the goal, I think, for most people, maybe it's not attainable, but after a few months, you forget the things that happened and who did it when, and being able to look back and say, oh, right, it was September 16th. That's when it happened. So
yeah,
it matters.
Well, and it doesn't have to be this huge novel every single time. Scutifer Mike, I just read your last session report. It's brief, it's punchy, it's short, it's to the point. It's amazing. It was a really fun read. If you guys want to know how it works,
I'm a terrible writer.
Look his stuff up.
Thank you. That means a lot because I am really bad at writing. So
all right, guys, we are past the 2-hour mark. I kind of want to wrap this up now. Let's go around again. Final thoughts. I think we've gone through about everything there is to go through in like 2 hours about mega dungeons and what we think about them. So final thoughts, and please plug your YouTube channel or anything else you have going on. Dundermoose, you can start.
All right. I have a YouTube channel. It's this is Dundermoose. If you just type it, I don't know how many Dundermoose there are out there. I think you should be able to find me if you search. My final
I think it's just at Dundermoose.
Yeah, just at Dundermoose.
Yeah, it's just at Dundermoose.
I don't think there's an underscore or anything.
Sorry.
Oh no, you're good. My final thought on the mega dungeon thing is that it is something that you can add to your campaign to solve a problem for the players. It doesn't have to be the focus of the campaign, and you should not put pressure on yourself to get your players all the way to the end to beat the mega dungeon. It's like the Goblin King from Labyrinth. It's everything you need it to be because you need it. It's there for you when you need it. But if your players don't want to go there, that's totally fine. It's just a place to solve their problems, but nothing's free, and they're going to have to risk their necks to get the goods.
Mike.
You can find me at Scutifer_Mike on YouTube, where we are building a mega dungeon with a couple of different systems. We have a couple mega dungeons that we're building. It's a solo play series, so we have Old School Essentials, we have AD&D, Shadow Dark. We're just building out a bunch of randomly generated dungeons and trying not to lose all of our characters in a TPK. My final thoughts on mega dungeons: they should feel alive. They should be changing and growing and reacting to what your players are doing. You should invest your players' characters into the factions that are existing in your mega dungeon. Give them reasons to go down there on a regular basis, so that way they can chase their personal goals, powerful artifacts, and make sure you're changing the shape and the occupants of the rooms so nothing feels static.
And Ryan Howard.
Yep. So I am on YouTube at Rollin' Bones. Rollin' Bones with Ryan Howard is my show. I'm live every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Central. This Tuesday, I will be joined for the first time by Mr. P. Alexander, aka Sir Sova, and he and I are going to be talking about Lit RPG and why it's awful. So,
No way, you got Sova on your show?
Yeah, he's going to.
Oh,
be
I
on.
like him.
He's a great guy, and funnily enough, my co-author from Browser, he actually finished the work that I started on the Cavemen. So we'll probably talk a little bit about that too. But my final thoughts on Mega Dungeons: they are another tool in your arsenal. They are another, as the James Bond theme song would say, they're another way to die. So, if you've got places where they make sense, or you have, these ideas or things that are forming together where you can create these kind of massive spaces where there's multiple different sections to the dungeon, go ahead and embrace the mega dungeon spirit, even if it's not, a hole in the ground like most people think of dungeons. So Mega Dungeons, it's just another way to do this. It's another tool in the arsenal, and it's one that people should utilize when it becomes appropriate for their game to do so.
All right. And I think we are going to wrap up here. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And thank you to all three of my co-hosts for coming. I really appreciated your guys' perspective. Please, guys, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And please subscribe to all three of these guys. They have wonderful YouTube channels. I've been on two of them. Mike won't have me on. He doesn't. It's not that kind of YouTube channel, though. Anyway.
Thanks for the house.
We will see you guys next month. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.